What becomes of a hero when the Emperor looks away? The question drifts like a shard of frost through the vaults of time, whispered by archivists who no longer exist and echoed by the ruins of worlds that once dared to hope. In the dust-choked silence of forgotten cathedra, ancient lumen sigil flickers back to life, revealing the first images of a tale long entombed. Captain Titus of the Ultramarines stands at the edge of memory, a figure carved from war and contradiction. He had defied a demon and lived, defied gravity and survived, defied the fate the Codex demanded. And for this, he was unmade. The Inquisition came not with accusation, but with certainty. Chains heavier than guilt clamped shut. A hero fell not to corruption, but to suspicion, the only sin the Imperium does not forgive. And thus began his descent into oblivion. The silence of the black cells is not absence, but pressure, a crushing dark that drinks faith like marrow. Titus endured its hunger. Days bled into years. Years calcified into something colder. He listened to the rattle of distant executions, the murmurs of interrogators conducting rituals of extraction. No demon haunted his cell, only the quiet question of why he still lived. Perhaps the Emperor had abandoned him. Perhaps the Inquisition still feared what he had survived. But deep within that void, Titus heard something else, a pulse, a memory. The battle cries of the Ultramarines echoing in perfect unity. It sustained him, a thread of light in a place designed to sever all hope. When the door finally opened, the light that spilled in felt wrong, as though it had forgotten how to touch the condemned. Exile was not granted but inflicted. Shackled by decree, Titus was delivered into the hands of the Grey Shields, stripped of insignia, stripped of certainty, stripped of the one truth he had always trusted, that loyalty was enough. He marched into campaigns where the dead outnumbered the living, where Primaris newly born were thrown into the furnace of war to earn identity. Titus fought beside them, bled with them, and remained silent about the storm that had unmade him. The galaxy around him split and screamed. The cicatrix maledictum tore reality apart, and in the rift light, he saw reflections of himself. Broken heroes, abandoned by the very Imperium they bled for. Yet Titus did not break. Exile was a crucible, and he refused to be its ash. Something within him burned too fiercely to die. Across 100 war zones, whispers followed him like migrating shadows. Some called him cursed, others blessed. Some claimed he had survived demonic corruption. Others insisted he was a weapon sanctioned by fate. Soldiers fought harder when he entered the fray. Xenos recoiled as though sensing the echo of something vast at his back. Titus ignored the rumors. He knew truth mattered little in a galaxy built on belief. What mattered was the war, and the war never ended. Yet every battlefield brought him closer to a strange convergence, a pattern he saw in enemy movements, in psychic tremors, in the shifting glow of the rift. Something ancient watched him, not as predator to prey, but as one choosing a vessel. The storms he survived had not been coincidences. They had been selections. When the call from Macragge reached him, it was not an invitation but a summons carved with the weight of destiny. Roboute Guilliman, returned from legend and clad in the mantle of a demigod, demanded his presence. Titus felt the tremor of 1,000 doubts stir within him. He had expected oblivion or execution, not recognition. The journey to the Primarch's presence felt like walking through a dream that belonged to another man. Guilliman regarded him not with suspicion, but with calculation. He spoke of the Imperium's fractures, the need for champions forged in trials beyond doctrine. And then, with a gesture heavy as a benediction, he restored Titus to command. Rank returned. Honor returned. Purpose reborn. Yet as the Primarch's gaze lingered on him, Titus sensed an unspoken truth. This was not mercy. It was preparation. The Indomitus Crusade welcomed him like a storm welcomes lightning. His armor, reforged in the cobalt of Ultramar, gleamed with new truth. But beneath the ceramite, Titus felt the old fracture in his fate widening. On shattered worlds, he led charges that bent the tide of war. On demon-haunted moons, he held lines that should have collapsed. His presence alone seemed to distort probability. Bolters jammed less, enemy strikes missed by hairs, psychic assaults rebounded with inexplicable force. Veterans spoke of him in hushed tones, as though invoking a relic that had not yet chosen whether it was holy or cursed. Titus did not claim to understand the power stirring in him, but he felt its rhythm now, like a second heartbeat beneath his own. Night on the world of Carthax Ix revealed the first crack in reality that bore his name. During a siege that devoured regiments whole, Titus entered a cathedral whose foundations warped under the weight of unspeakable memories. There, in a chamber sealed since the Horus Heresy, he encountered inscriptions in a script no mortal hand could have carved, a prophecy etched into adamantium by something neither demon nor god. It spoke of a warrior who would fall without falling, who would bear exile as chrysalis, and who would be delivered unto rebirth by flame and sorrow. Titus had never believed in prophecy, yet the markings glowed as he approached, resonating with the cadence of his heartbeat. When he touched the wall, it pulsed, as though recognizing him. The wall cracked open, releasing a metallic wail older than the Imperium. Behind it lay a relic, a blade forged from a material colder than void and brighter than starfire. Its hilt was shaped for a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, yet its design was alien, human, divine, impossible. Titus felt the blade's presence crawl along his armor, whispering of wars predating humanity. It was not a demon weapon, its purity was absolute. But purity, he realized, could be just as terrifying as corruption. When he grasped it, the cathedral trembled. Outside, the siege faltered as enemies collapsed to their knees, clutching their skulls in agony. Titus had not swung the blade, merely held it. The weapon had chosen him, and in that moment, he understood why he had survived when all logic said he should not. Rumors of the blade spread faster than sanctioned truth. Inquisitorial agents observed him from the shadows. Mechanicus priests muttered Benhuric prayers in envy. Primarus initiates saw him as an omen. Titus pressed on, refusing to let prophecy devour purpose. He wielded the blade only when necessary, and each time the battlefield convulsed with unnatural clarity, as though fate itself was adjusting to accommodate him. Yet with each victory, he sensed something awakening within the weapon, a presence not sentient, but directive. It guided his strikes, tugged at his instincts, nudged him toward outcomes he did not fully choose. The Emperor's will, or something far older pretending to be divine. Titus carried the burden in silence, knowing that faith built on lies was still faith, and faith was the only thing that kept humanity alive. During the Battle of the Silent Maw, a tendril of the warp itself split open before Titus, birthing demons that crawled from the tear like maggots from a wound in time. As the world screamed, the blade in his hand ignited with spectral luminance. The demons recoiled, Titus charged. Each strike tore not flesh but essence, unraveling things that should not die. His brothers witnessed him move with impossible precision, as though an unseen intelligence puppeted him toward the heart of the rift. When he drove the blade into the tear, the warp howled, not in pain, but in recognition. The rift collapsed instantly, leaving a silence so profound it felt blasphemous. When Titus looked at the blade, its surface shimmered with symbols matching those in the cathedral. It was awakening. And it was not done. Whispers reached Guilliman, carried by psychers who trembled even to repeat them. The Primarch summoned Titus once more, his expression shadowed by concern. He demanded the blade. Titus refused. Not out of rebellion, but out of instinct. The weapon could not be surrendered. Guilliman saw the truth in his eyes, a truth that unsettled even a demigod. He did not press the matter. Instead, he assigned Titus to a campaign far from the Imperium's heart, as though distance could dilute destiny. Yet Titans do not escape fate by marching elsewhere. They only draw fate's gaze more clearly. And so Titus went, leading warriors who believed in him more fiercely than he believed in himself. Now, upon a barren moon nameless on all charts, Titus stands alone in a crater filled with silence. The blade hums faintly, resonating with something buried beneath the surface. He does not yet know what sleeps below. He does not know why the stars above him flicker as though blinking in warning. But he feels the air shift. The same pulse that once echoed through the black cells returns, stronger, closer, anticipating. The ground trembles, the blade brightens, and as the dust begins to rise around him like the breath of something awakening, Captain Titus whispers a single thought to the void. "Why do you know my name?" the silence answers. But not in words. The silence curled around Titus like the exhalation of a buried titan. It pressed against his armor, insinuating itself into the seams of his soul, a hush so ancient it felt like memory masquerading as air. The blade in his hand pulsed once, a heartbeat not his own, and in that moment, the moon's surface seemed to ripple. Titus felt thoughts that were not thoughts, an echo of lament carried from epochs where mankind had not yet dared to crawl from Terra's cradle. A vision flickered. Warriors of impossible form kneeling before a light too bright to name, and among them a figure whose silhouette mirrored his. When the vision shattered, so did the ground beneath him. Dust boiled upward, but the silence remained, watching him. He felt, for the first time since the Black Cells, the cold finger of destiny draw a line across his existence. Far above the crater, orbiting in vigil, the chapel ship Vigilant Requiem received data streams corrupted beyond all coherence. Tech priests whispered Benharic litanies as static bled into their optics. The machine spirit recoiled, struggling to articulate the anomaly beneath Titus's position. In the reclusium, Chaplain Veramus knelt before a cracked aquila, feeling the disturbance not as sound, but as dread. He had served centuries, spoken benedictions over worlds that died screaming, but this felt different, deeper, like the first subtle tear in a cathedral's foundation. The ship's young Primaris recruits felt it too, murmuring uneasily among themselves. Some believed Titus cursed. Others believed him chosen. Veramus feared both were true. As he rose to his feet, he felt a tremor in his rosarius, a sign no litany could soothe. Something on that moon had awoken, and its attention was fixed upon one man. Deep within the ship's librarius, the psychers convulsed as one, their eyes rolling back as spectral frost crawled across the chamber walls. Librarian Calus staggered, clutching the edge of his lectern as psychic backlash slammed into him like a tidal wave of shattered prayers. He saw a paradox. Titus standing in the crater, surrounded by echoes of timelines that should not coexist. Calus glimpsed three versions of the captain simultaneously: the hero, the exile, the unknown, all superimposed like mirrored reflections on fractured glass. The warp did not whisper corruption, it whispered recognition. As Calus collapsed to his knees, breath shallow, he felt a sickening realization coil through his mind. Something in the warp feared Titus, not the Inquisition, not the demons. Something older, patient, and silent as the grave. When the vision receded, Calus rose trembling. He knew he must warn Guilliman, yet he also knew the Primarch already suspected. Below, on the moon's surface, the tremors subsided, leaving Titus standing in eerie calm. The dust settled, revealing markings carved into the crater floor, patterns identical to those in the ancient cathedral, but these symbols moved. Not physically, but perceptually, rearranging themselves each time Titus blinked. The blade vibrated in his grasp, resonating with the lunar glyphs as though sharing a dialect. Titus felt the air thicken, and with it came a peculiar sensation. Not fear, but recognition. He felt as though he had stood in this place before, though logic denied it. His armor's sensors began to fail, scrolling warnings across his helm, and then the whispers began. Not words, not thoughts, but impressions like fingers brushing the surface of his mind. The moon was remembering him, or dreaming of him. And dreams in the far future were often prophecies in disguise. Unseen by Titus, the moon's buried depths stirred as Auspec signatures bloomed across the Vigilant Requiem. Mechanicus Magos Tersidax studied the readings, his mechadendrites shivering in excitement. The signatures were unmistakable, a power source predating the age of technology. Perhaps even the Dark Age, perhaps even older. Tersidax's cogitators whirred as he constructed impossible hypotheses. Could it be a Xenos artifact? No, its pattern was too symmetrical, too restrained, too human. But humanity had never built anything so stable, so cold, so patient. The Magos whispered fragments of forbidden schema, invoking ancient machine spirits not acknowledged by the priesthood. His acolytes watched in fear, realizing their master was invoking names spoken only in sealed redacted archives. When the reading spiked again, Tersidax froze. The artifact below was not merely activating, it was answering a signal, one that had been dormant for millennia, and the source of that signal stood in the crater. On the surface, Titus felt the ground pulse beneath his feet, rhythmic as a colossal heartbeat. The dust parted as though drawn away by unseen tides, revealing a circular hatch tens of meters wide, etched with sigils reminiscent of Imperial design but refined beyond comprehension. As the lines glowed with blue fire, Titus raised the blade instinctively. His vox crackled with frantic transmissions from the Requiem, but all he heard were shards of broken syllables. Alone, he watched the hatch split open with silent grace, revealing a stairway descending into perfect darkness. A wind exhaled from the abyss, cold, dry, purposeful. Titus sensed no demonic taint, no warp corruption. This was something unburdened by madness, something crafted by minds that understood war as intimately as the Emperor himself. And yet, it felt incomplete, as though waiting for the missing piece, as though waiting for him. The descent carved itself into Titus's memory like ritual. No sound, no heat, no hint of life accompanied him into the depths. Only the unwavering hum of the blade, guiding him as though remembering its birthplace. The walls were carved from a material smoother than ceramite, more ancient than ferrocrete, and inscribed with runes that shifted like reflections in rippling water. Titus felt the weight of history pressing against him, not the Imperium's history, but a deeper, older lineage erased from all records. At the base of the stairs, he entered a hall the size of a fortress, illuminated by pale lumens that ignited as he stepped forward. In the center stood an empty dais, shaped to cradle the blade he carried. As he approached, the chamber vibrated. His armor systems flickered. The dais called for the weapon. Yet Titus felt a dangerous truth. Placing the blade might awaken something far beyond his control. Far beyond the moon's surface, political storms brewed in the void like gathering thunderheads. Inquisitor Rael Vos watched the readings from the moon, his face carved from suspicion and cold doctrine. Titus was not merely a soldier to him. He was a threat wrapped in armor, a deviation given breath. Vos had followed Titus's career with predatory patience, convinced that no man survived demonic encounters unmarked. Guilliman's favor infuriated him. The Primarch's trust masked what Vos called strategic blindness. As data from Tersidax streamed in, Vos's eyes narrowed. Ancient technology responding to Titus specifically? Impossible. Unacceptable. Heretical. The Inquisitor clenched his fist, whispering a vow to unmake whatever truth lay beneath that moon. For if Titus was tied to Forbidden's lineage, if he was bound to relics predating the Imperium, then he was a threat greater than any demon. And threats, Vos believed, must be purged. In the Requiem's Reclusium, Chaplain Veramus prepared the warriors for descent, yet his voice wavered. He felt fractures widening within his faith, not doubt in the Emperor, but in the stories built around him. For the Emperor was a god who denied godhood, a savior who never saved himself, a creator who allowed his creations to shatter under endless war. Veramus felt guilt gnaw at him, shame blooming like a bruise. He loved the Emperor. But love could not blind him to the truth rising like a specter. Titus's destiny was intertwined with something outside the Imperium's catechisms. Perhaps something older than the Emperor's own wars. As the warriors prepared to deploy, Veramus whispered a final prayer, not to the Emperor, but to courage itself. For he sensed they would need it more than faith. At the base of the moon's impossible chamber, Titus stood before the dais, feeling the pull of inevitability. The blade throbbed with restrained longing, its resonance matching the heartbeat of the structure around him. He sensed memories that were not his, battles fought by warriors clad in armor too advanced to name. He saw them fall, rise, burn, rebuild, cycles of war repeating long before humanity crawled from Terra's cradle. And then he saw something worse, a figure resembling the Emperor himself standing before the dais, placing the same blade upon the pedestal, sealing away a truth too dangerous for its time. The vision shattered, leaving Titus breathless. His gauntlet hovered above the dais. Was he resurrecting an ancient defense, or unsealing a weapon forged to challenge gods? Above, alarm screamed across the vigilant requiem. A warp anomaly burst into being directly beside the moon. Not violent, but precise, controlled, like a door opening politely rather than being torn apart. From the rift emerged a vessel of unknown origin, its silhouette echoing archaic Terran design, yet twisted by technologies unseen since myth. Inquisitor was paled, tech priests fell to their knees, chaplains froze between prayers. The ship bore no sigils, no transmissions. Only a single symbol burned upon its prow, the same shifting glyphs engraved into the lunar chamber. And as the vessel drifted toward the moon in absolute silence, every sensor in the fleet registered a single paralyzing truth. It was not arriving, it was returning. Worst of all, it had come for Titus. The vessel's shadow eclipsed the moon like an omen too heavy for the present age to bear. In the depths below, Titus felt its arrival before sensors confirmed it, a pressure behind the sternum, as if a colossal hand pressed gently against his soul. The dais pulsed faster. The blade's glow deepened into a solemn azure, and the sigils carved into the chamber walls fluttered like trapped spirits awakening. In that instant, Titus felt exiled again, not by decree but by fate itself, torn between the Imperium that had once cast him aside and a calling older than his gene line. A whisper bloomed in his mind, not language but recognition, a door in memory unlocking where there had never been a door. He steadied his breath. Above him, the world trembled. Within him, something shifted, a truth he feared to name. On the vigilant requiem, Chaplain Veramus stared through the viewport as the vessel drifted closer, its hull scarred by wars no imperial archive had ever spoken of. His faith wavered beneath its silent grandeur. He whispered the catechism of endurance, but the words felt brittle, like recitations from a creed written for a different universe. He had always believed the Emperor's light was absolute, but this ship, cold, patient, familiar, felt like a truth the Imperium had been built specifically to hide. A tremor worked through his bones. If this vessel was shaped by human hands, then humanity had lived far older lives than history claimed. If it was not, then their gods were not as singular as priests taught. Veramus bowed his head, beads of sweat falling like holy water onto the deck, as he asked the Emperor to forgive him for doubting. But silence answered instead. In the Librarius, Callus convulsed as psychic shockwaves rippled from the moon, each pulse carrying fragments of visions too sharp to bear. He saw rings of ancient fortresses orbiting dead stars, entire civilizations extinguished by entities whose shapes defied geometry. He saw warriors forged not by gene seed or primarch, but by something far colder, intention. And woven through it all was Titus, not as man, not as captain, but as fulcrum. The Psyker screamed as his mind brushed a truth forbidden to mortals, that humanity once wielded powers now attributed to myth, and that the Emperor himself had buried those legacies beneath oceans of sanctioned ignorance. Callus collapsed, tears of blood staining the floor. He whispered a plea, not for survival, but for clarity. The warp answered him with a single blinding certainty. Titus was not being chosen. He was being reclaimed. Inquisitor Vos prepared his forces with ruthless precision, fury simmering beneath his disciplined exterior. The return of the ancient vessel confirmed his darkest suspicions. Titus was tied to something beyond imperial law, outside sanctioned truth, and therefore unacceptable. Yet beneath Voss's conviction lay a secret he would never confess: fear. Not fear of corruption, but fear that the Imperium's foundations were built on deliberate omission. If this vessel belonged to humanity's forgotten epics, then everything the ecclesiarchy preached was incomplete. Perhaps intentionally so. Voss had risen on a doctrine of certainty. Doubt was poison. Yet doubt gnawed at him now, whispering treasonous questions. He dismissed them with a snarl. Heresy was heresy, no matter its age. And if the Emperor had buried an age of power, he had done so for a reason. Titus, therefore, must die, not as vengeance, but as preservation. As Titus approached the dais, his fingers tightened around the blade, the weapon vibrating like a creature eager to be returned to its cradle. The chamber brightened in slow, rhythmic pulses, each illumination revealing more carvings, more echoes of a forgotten age. Titus felt memories press against him, not his own, yet painfully familiar. He saw visions of soldiers clad in armor that put the Adeptus Astartes to shame, their movements seamless, their eyes burning with resolute purpose. He saw wars fought not with bolters, but with weapons that manipulated probability itself. These warriors bore the same sigils etched into his blade and the vessel above, and at their forefront, a figure whose stance, whose bearing, whose impossible presence mirrored his. Titus stumbled back, gasping. Was this a memory? A prophecy? Or a lineage he had never been allowed to know? The ground quaked as the vessel released tendrils of pale light into the moon's crust, illuminating subterranean corridors untouched for eons. The luminous strands reached the chamber like searching fingers, wrapping around the dais with deliberate grace. Magos Tersidax, watching via remote auspex, felt a techno-religious ecstasy ignite within him. This was no Xenos relic. This was a human design far surpassing the Imperium's stagnant industry. His faith in the Omnissiah wavered, not toward heresy, but toward awe. Humanity had once wielded godlike creation, and the Emperor, the master of mankind, had chosen to bury it. Why? Tersidax trembled as a forbidden hypothesis unfurled in his mind. Perhaps the Emperor feared not Xenos, not chaos, but humanity's own forgotten potential. If so, Titus was not a threat to the Imperium. He was a threat to its narrative. Outside, battle erupted as the inquisitorial storm teams broke protocol and launched an unauthorized strike against the moon. Drop pods screamed through the void. Lost fire blazed against ultramarine armor as Voss declared Titus an imminent existential hazard. The Requiem was thrown into divided loyalties, some obeying Guilliman's restored trust in Titus, others succumbing to the weight of inquisitorial authority. Chaplain Veramus descended into the conflict, Crozius swinging like judgment made flesh, his heart splitting as he fought brothers in the name of a truth none of them understood. War erupted not from hatred, but from desperation, loyalists grappling with the terror that their loyalty itself might be misplaced. Blood stained the moon's dust as warriors clashed beneath the looming ancient vessel, their battle a microcosm of a galaxy drowning in contradictions. Each strike echoed the Imperium's fractured soul. Below, Titus felt the tremors of war above him. He knew Veramus fought. He knew Voss's zeal would not be stopped. But the dais glowed brighter, its pull irresistible now, its purpose laid bare in shimmering visions. Titus approached it like a man walking into his own grave. He raised the blade, yet before he could place it, the chamber rippled with energy. A voice, not audible, not psychic, but intrinsic, resonated through him. You were forged for this. Titus froze, breath stolen. Forged? By who? By what? The Emperor? The forgotten makers of this vessel? Or something that stood beyond even them? The chamber waited. The blade pulsed once more, urging him. Above, screams and gunfire blended into a single distant lament. Titus whispered a prayer that felt foreign on his tongue. not to the Emperor, but to truth itself. In the orbit above, Callus staggered to the bridge, compelled by a vision he could no longer resist. He shouted warnings that drowned beneath alarms. He had seen what would awaken if the blade met the dais. Not a weapon, not a machine. A memory, a living archive that would rewrite the Imperium's understanding of its own origin. Callus begged them to stop Titus, not out of fear, but out of mercy. For in his final vision he saw a galaxy where the truth unleashed would fracture the Imperium more deeply than any heresy since Horus. It would reveal that the Emperor's war for humanity was not salvation, but containment. His warning came too late. The ship's machine spirits howled in rising terror as the chamber below reached ignition threshold. Titus placed the blade upon the dais. Light burst outward in a silent explosion, reality bending around him like molten glass. The visions returned, clearer, sharper, undeniable. He saw legions of warriors identical to him in form, but not in soul, crafted by an ancient order not to serve gods or emperors, but to inherit the universe. He saw the Emperor's face, younger, fierce, desperate, sealing this army away, locking their legacy behind millennia of ignorance. Not because they were flawed, but because they were perfect. Because humanity had once been destined for mastery, not survival. And the Emperor, choosing survival over destiny, entombed a truth too dangerous for a fractured species. The chamber's light faded. The blade rose from the dais, transformed. So did Titus. His eyes glowed with the same impossible sigils carved into the vessel. His breath echoed with ancient cadence. His voice no longer belonged entirely to him. And in the cold, trembling silence, he spoke words that had not been heard in 10,000 years. Initiation protocol restored. The firstborn directive resumes. The galaxy felt the shift. And nothing, not faith, not history, not the Imperium itself, would survive what those words meant. The words hung in the chamber like a fault line carved through destiny. Titus felt them resonate inside him, vibrating through every fiber of gene-wrought muscle until his armor itself seemed to shudder in recognition. Above him, the ancient vessel answered with a deep, harmonic thrum, not mechanical, not psychic, but something that lived between those truths. The air quivered as the sigils in his eyes glowed brighter, their patterns spiraling into formations older than the Imperium's first breath. Yet beneath the surge of power, Titus felt grief like a blade pressed against his spirit. He remembered the chains of the black cells, the doubt of his brothers, the silence of the Emperor. He remembered the cost of loyalty in a realm where truth had always been rationed like water in a desert. He whispered a single question to the dark: "What am I now?" The chamber gave no answer. Above the moon's scarred surface, the battle froze as every warrior felt a tremor echo through their bones. Chaplain Veramus staggered mid-blow, his crozius dripping with blood, some not as a cold premonition seized his heart. A presence unfurled across the battlefield like a storm preparing to descend. He had felt dread before. He had preached through it, fought through it, buried brothers beneath it. But this was different. This was revelation masquerading as terror, truth wearing the skin of dread. He sensed Titus's transformation through the bond of shared duty, but it felt like witnessing a star collapse in slow motion, glorious, terrifying, inevitable. Veramus knelt on the dust-choked ground, helmet bowed, whispering a prayer torn between devotion and despair. Was this the Emperor's will unfolding at last, or the universe reclaiming what the Imperium tried to bury? Inquisitor Vos watched as readings spiked beyond rational comprehension, his face twisted with vindicated horror. Titus was no longer merely suspect. He was proof that the Imperium's theology was built on selective blindness. Vos's heart pounded like a war drum. He believed in the Emperor, yes, but he believed more fiercely in the order the Emperor created. If Titus's awakening spread, if knowledge of the firstborn directive reached ecclesiarchal ears, entire star systems would revolt. The Imperium would splinter. Faith would fracture. And the Emperor's dream, whatever it had truly been, would collapse beneath the weight of revelation. Vos activated a private channel. "All forces," he commanded, voice cold as execution stone. "New directive. Eliminate Captain Titus. Surgical strike. Maximum sanction." His gaze hardened. This ends now. But somewhere deep in his zeal, a whisper he refused to acknowledge murmured, "What if this is the Emperor's design?" The vigilant requiem groaned as energy bled from the ancient vessel into its systems, overriding machine spirits with alien grace. Magos Tersidax gazed in rapture as data streams carved unknown symbols across his mechadendrites. Information beyond human thresholds flooded the noospheric. Channels, schematics, histories, directives, technologies unattainable by the Imperium's stagnant dogma. His biological heart fluttered, overwhelmed by awe and terror. He realized the ancient vessel did not merely recognize Titus, it recognized the entire Adeptus Astartes gene template as a flawed echo of something older, purer. The firstborn directive had been the original blueprint. The Astartes were imperfect descendants of perfection. Tersidax trembled. Omnissiah, what have we forgotten? The machine spirits howled. The data stream turned violent. Sparks erupted as cogitators overloaded. The vessel was not sharing knowledge. It was preparing the next phase. Deep within the chamber, Titus staggered as ghost memories cascaded through him. He saw legions descending from celestial citadels, each warrior a living bulwark forged to challenge cosmic predators that preyed on fledgling civilizations. He saw the Emperor standing among them, not as their maker, but as their heir, a successor to a forgotten mantle. Humanity had not risen from darkness by chance. It had inherited power buried beneath eons of silence. And Titus now felt that inheritance awakening in his marrow, rewriting him. His gene seed pulsed in molten waves, expanding, reshaping, ascending. His bones creaked. His senses sharpened until he could feel the heartbeat of the moon itself. Terror gripped him. This was not corruption. It was not mutation, but it was more than any son of Gilliman should ever become. "Emperor," he whispered, "what did you hide from us?" Outside, the battle reignited with feral desperation. Ultramarines and inquisitorial storm teams clashed beneath the oppressive glow of the vessel. Belief battled belief. Doctrine carved itself into living flesh. Primarus warriors hesitated, torn between loyalty to their reborn captain and indoctrination bred into their souls. Bolter shells burst like dying stars. Chains words screamed prayers of steel. And at the center of it, Chaplain Veramus fought with tears burning behind his helm lenses. He swung his Crozius as though punishing his own uncertainty. Every blow felt like an apology whispered too late. "Forgive us, Titus," he muttered. "Forgive us for doubting. Forgive us for fearing what we do not understand." But even as he fought, a deeper truth gnawed at him. He feared not the Inquisition, not heresy, not treachery. He feared what Titus was becoming. In the void, the ancient vessel shifted its orientation. Massive plates unfolding like wings unfurling after millennia of slumber. It cast a luminous veil across the battlefield, halting the violence as warriors shielded their eyes from its radiance. The ship emitted a soundless pulse that penetrated armor, bone, and thought. Every combatant felt a presence brushing their consciousness, neither benevolent nor hostile, but assessing, measuring, cataloging. Vos dropped to one knee, clutching his skull as the pulse scraped across his mind like frost-covered steel. Veramus gasped, feeling 1,000 unseen eyes examine his faith as though dissecting it. Tersidax whispered binary prayers as his implants vibrated. The pulse faded, and then the vessel began projecting symbols across the moon's surface, impossible glyphs that reconfigured themselves into patterns resembling marching formations. The chamber doors behind Titus sealed as the dais rose, encircling him in a cocoon of scintillating light. His armor peeled apart as though obeying an ancient command, plates loosening, rearranging, reshaping into a new configuration not forged by Adeptus artisans. Sigils burned across the ceramite, merging with the armor's structure. His pauldrons curved into angular arcs modeled after the warriors in his visions. The backpack vents extended into sleek conduits humming with impossible energy. Titus screamed not in pain, but in unbearable clarity. His body was becoming a bridge between what humanity had been and what it had become. When the metamorphosis ended, he stood taller, heavier, resonating with dormant power. He felt like a weapon finally unsheathed. And yet his soul ached, mourning the man he had been. A low rumble shook the chamber as new vision stabbed into Titus's awareness. He saw the Emperor again, not enthroned, not dying, but forging worlds alongside beings of impossible stature. He saw the birth of the Imperium not as the beginning, but as the final fallback in a series of desperate gambits to protect humanity from truths too large for fractured minds. The Emperor had not hidden ancient humanity out of pride. He had buried it out of fear that the species broken by millennia of anarchy and war would destroy itself if given godlike inheritance too soon. Titus understood now. His resurrection was not a gift. It was a breach, a failure in the Emperor's grand containment. He whispered, voice trembling, "Why me?" The chamber answered with a single phrase etched into his mind. "Because you refused to fall." Above, the battlefield dissolved into chaos as the vessel released a second pulse, this one violent. Gravity warped. Dust spiraled upward. Warriors were thrown from their feet. And then the moon cracked. Fissures ripped across the surface, glowing with searing blue light. The ancient machinery beneath began to rise, lifting colossal structures from the lunar bedrock. Towers emerged like bones breaking through skin. The battlefield split as entire platoons slid toward chasms forming beneath them. Vus stared in horror. Verames cried out to the Emperor. Tersidax exalted in worship. The moon was transforming, awakening into a fortress world older than recorded time. And at its heart stood the chamber, rising toward the vessel like a throne ascending to welcome its rightful occupant. Inside the chamber, Titus approached a circular aperture that opened before him like an eye. Beyond it lay the command sanctum of the ancient ship, dormant for countless millennia. As he stepped inside, the sigils in his armor flared, and the entire vessel responded, engines awakening, systems rebooting, lights flickering to life. Titus felt the ship recognize him. Not as intruder, not as master, but as successor. His hands trembled as he reached for the central control column. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to remain the man he had been. But destiny pressed a firm hand against his spine. He touched the control column. A blinding surge of power enveloped him. The ship spoke a phrase that chilled every soul across the battlefield. Firstborn command restored. Awakening sequence initiated. And across the galaxy, dormant structures began to stir. The words crashed through Titus like a thunderhead-given voice. The sanctum blazed in argent light as the firstborn vessel's awakening throbbed through every system, every forgotten engine, every cathedral of metal and memory. He felt the psychic pressure expanding outward, a sphere of revelation threatening to tear him apart from within. His heartbeat hammered like a fortress under siege. Outside, he sensed warriors falling to their knees, others lifting their weapons in dread defiance, and still others weeping without understanding why. The ship recognized him, not for what he had become, but for what he represented. The fracture point between humanity's forgotten past and its fragile present. Titus reached deeper into the control column, feeling time itself buckle as ancient protocols unfurled. His voice was a graveled whisper strangled with awe and terror. "If this is destiny, then let it fall on me alone." The vessel answered simply, "It will not." The moon convulsed as vast armored plates unlocked beneath its crust, splitting apart with detonation force tremors. Towers like obsidian ribs rose into the sky, showering debris across the battlefield. Warriors, loyalists, and inquisitorial both screamed into vox beads as the ground bucked beneath them. Storm teams tumbled into widening chasms. Primaris Marines anchored their boots with magnetic clamps and roared stabilization orders no one could hear through the cacophony. Chaplain Veramis braced himself atop a rising metal spire, his crozius clutched to his chest as he stared at the moon's metamorphosis. For a moment, he felt the breath of the Emperor at his back, warm, stern, silent. Then the warmth faded, replaced by a cold realization. This awakening was not divine punishment nor blessing. It was consequence. Humanity had built its Imperium atop half-truths and graves. And now the dead were stirring, asking their due. Veramis whispered, "Forgive us, Titus." The moon kept rising. Inquisitor Vos bellowed for extraction as his retinue was swallowed beneath collapsing terrain. Vox static choked every line. His gunship hovered just beyond reach, its pilot shrieking warnings about gravitational distortions. Vos sprinted across a rupturing platform, his boots striking metal that vibrated with alien resonance. Terror took root in his throat, not fear of death, but fear of the collapse of everything he had ever believed unshakable. Titus had become the fulcrum of a heresy beyond doctrinal containment. The awakening sequence was rewriting reality before Vos's eyes. He reached the edge of a widening fissure just as his footing gave way. A Primaris Marine one he had condemned hours earlier caught his wrist, hauling him to safety without a word. Vos stared at him, stunned. The Marine simply said, "Titus is ours." Vos's retort died as the sky split open in blinding white. The vessel was descending. The firstborn vessel anchored itself into the moon with tendrils of light, merging with the rising structures as if reclaiming its long-sundered throne. Its radiance illuminated every warrior, casting long shadows that writhed across the metal terrain. A psychic shockwave burst outward, slamming every mind with visions. Star-spanning wars waged by beings clad in armor like constellations, primordial foes that devoured whole cultures. The Emperor standing among giants, not as their father but as their last survivor. Many fell screaming, some went silent. A few whispered prayers that tasted like ashes. Magos Tersidax convulsed as his implants overloaded, pouring out data that defied categorization. He saw the Omnissiah's truth. The Mechanicum had been worshipping echoes carved from ignorance. As he fell to his knees, circuits smoking, he whispered, "We were children handed weapons made for gods." The vessel shuddered again. Something was coming alive. Inside the sanctum, the control column split open, revealing a long, spiraling core of crystalline mechanisms rotating around a void of pure black light. Titus felt its pull on his gene seed, on the marrow of his transhuman bones. Every instinct screamed that this core was not technology. It was purpose given shape. The warmth of Guilliman's teachings, of Ultramar's values, of brotherhood forged in fire. Those memories strained beneath the crushing gravity of ancient inheritance. Titus felt his identities collide like continents. Captain, Exile, Astartes, Firstborn, Weapon, Man. He braced himself as the core extended a tendril of light toward his chest. "If you touch me," he whispered, "you unmake everything I was." The tendril paused as if listening. Then it shifted, no longer reaching for him, but waiting, offering, an oath unspoken. Titus stepped forward. The sanctum trembled, awaiting the universe's next breath. Chaplain Veramis saw the sanctum rising toward the vessel and knew, with painful clarity, that he might never see Titus again. He signaled his squad, voice hoarse, "Form on me." We ascend. The ground beneath them warped into a rising causeway, a bridge of luminous metal. Thunderhawks attempted to follow but were repelled by shimmering barriers. Only those bound to Titus by blood oath and memory could tread the ascending path. Veramis climbed, every step a prayer carved from grief. He remembered Titus's loyalty, his courage, his excommunication, his resurrection, and the silent wound it had cut in every brother's heart. Behind him, the Marines followed with grim resolve, armor scarred, souls heavier than ceramite. As they approached the sanctum's threshold, Veramis felt a force tighten around his spirit. A warning. A question. Are you worthy to witness what comes next? He kept walking. Turcidax dragged his sparking frame toward a rising platform, connected to the sanctum's lower conduits. His mechadendrites twitched, half-melted, but he felt an imperative greater than survival, to see the truth with his own eyes. Sparks danced across his vision as machine spirits whimpered and died in his implants. But the deeper he advanced, the clearer the data became. This vessel was not awakening for Titus alone. It was awakening for humanity, or what humanity had once been. As he approached the conduit, a holographic projection flickered to life, a towering warrior clad in radiant armor unlike any known pattern. Turcidax froze in reverence. The figure raised a hand, palm outward, as if in greeting or warning. Binary fluttered across Turcidax's dying implants. A single message. "We remember you," he wept, cooling oil dripping from his chin. "On Messiah. We forgot you." The vessel's core blazed as auxiliary reactors ignited, sending golden rivers of energy coursing through the sanctum's walls. Outside, the moon's surface reshaped into a colossal sigil spanning hundreds of kilometers, an activation pattern etched into reality. From orbit, it resembled a starburst devouring itself. Voss stared from the gunship's open ramp, unable to speak. This was no heretic artifice, no Xenos trickery, no demonic blasphemy. This was human, ancient, terrifying. Across the battlefield, warriors lowered their weapons, some falling to their knees as they sensed history tilting into a new axis. In that silence, broken only by humming power and distant screams, the truth became undeniable. The Imperium had been living in the shadow of a forgotten golden age, and now that age was stirring. Voss muttered, "This will unmake everything." The moon answered with a tremor. "Good." Inside the sanctum, the crystalline core extended its tendril again, but not toward Titus this time. Toward the galaxy. Projections burst outward, revealing star maps, long-dead colonies, sleeping fortresses, and warnings carved in the language of creation. Titus felt the enormity of it crush him, a threat older than chaos, older than humanity's empires. A void creature spanning epochs, consuming civilizations until only silence remained. The firstborn had been forged to stop it. They had failed. Titus saw their final stand, their burning worlds, their dying god-kings, and the last order given before extinction: hide the seed of our strength within the future. Let the last inheritors rise when the shadow returns. Titus choked. He whispered, "Is that what I am, a contingency?" The core pulsed once, yes. Veramas and his warriors reached the sanctum doors as they opened with a sound like morning steel. The air inside shimmered with psychic weight, pressing against their lungs. Titus stood at the core's edge, his armor radiant, his presence unsettlingly vast. Veramas froze at the sight, awed, terrified, proud. Titus turned, and for a moment, he looked exactly as he once had. A captain, a brother, a man. "Veramas," he said softly, "I do not know what comes next." The chaplain stepped forward, placing a gauntlet on Titus's shoulder. "No warrior ever does. We only decide whether to face it with courage." The sanctum shuddered. The core extended tendrils of light toward all of them. Offering unity or annihilation, Veramas nodded. "We stand with you, brother." Titus closed his eyes. "And accepted." The core detonated in a silent explosion of light, pure, impossible, world-sculpting light. It engulfed the sanctum, the moon, the vessel, the warriors, the sky itself. Reality buckled. Time staggered. For one heartbeat, every soul in orbit and on the surface felt their consciousness stretched across millennia, witnessing the death of an ancient age and the birth of its successor. And then, just as quickly, the light collapsed inward, compressing into Titus like a dying star folding into a single point. He screamed, a cry torn from the marrow of existence. The sanctum shattered, the vessel convulsed. The moon cracked down its spine. And then everything went dark, silent, cold, still. When sight returned, the battlefield was transformed into a metallic plain of smoking ruins and shimmering dust. The firstborn vessel was gone, vanished without trace. The sanctum was reduced to molten slag. Only a crater remained, vast and still glowing at its edges. Veramis knelt at its center, armor cracked, Crozius buried in the ground beside him. He stared at the scorched earth where Titus had stood. Beside him, surviving ultramarines formed a silent vigil. Vos approached, limping, pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. None were enough. None could encompass what had changed, what had been lost, what had awakened. Above them, the stars flickered in new patterns, as if rearranging themselves to accommodate an old truth reborn. Something eternal had shifted. Its meaning remained unspoken. The crater glowed like the wound of a god, its molten rim whispering the steam of creation and loss. Veramis remained kneeling at its center long after the battle smoke thinned into a ghostly haze, as if he feared the universe would forget Titus should he rise. Around him, shattered helms and scorched purity seals flapped in the dry breeze, remnants of warriors who had given their final breaths to a dawn they would never see. Above, the reformed constellations pulsed faintly, like the lingering echo of an ancient heartbeat. Chaplain Veramis bowed his head and pressed the Crozius into the earth. "Brother," he whispered, "may your sacrifice be remembered longer than our empire's pride." But the crater only sighed in cooling silence. It felt not like an ending, but a sealing in archive shut, a promise buried. And the galaxy, vast and indifferent, simply turned. The surviving ultramarines set about gathering the fallen, moving with the slow reverence of monks tending to the dead of a long-forgotten monastery. Each helm became a reliquary, each fragment of armor a scripture carved in ceramite. Their footsteps pressed shallow impressions into the metallic plane, yet somehow even these seemed too loud for the moment. The air was heavy with an almost holy quiet, a suffocating hush that bent the mind toward reflection. In the distance, the remains of the firstborn structures glimmered faintly before collapsing into drifting shards of dust. No declaration of victory came. No hymn, no cry of triumph. Only the soft clang of armor and the distant crack of cooling metal. In the silence, a truth seeped into every soul present. Something magnificent and terrible had transpired here, something that defied language. Something that demanded to be mourned. Across the ruins, Inquisitor Vos walked alone, leaning heavily on a broken staff. His eyes flicked between the crater and the sky, searching for meaning in the patterns of light that now twisted above the moon like fresh scars. He muttered half-remembered liturgies, though he no longer believed in the certainties they once carried. The Inquisition demanded answers, but the universe had offered him only questions. He paused beside a toppled statue of an imperial eagle, its wings cracked, its gaze hollow. He touched the stone, and it crumbled beneath his fingers like ancient bone. "What did we awaken?" he whispered, voice trembling with awe and dread. The wind answered with a soft sigh, carrying motes of silver dust that clung to his skin like reminders of a truth he was unworthy to bear. Vos closed his eyes. He had come to condemn Titus. Now he mourned him. Far from the crater, Magos Turcidax rested against a half-melted pillar, flickering sparks dancing across his ruined augmetics. His optic lenses dimmed and brightened in uneven pulses, struggling to retain function, yet he refused to power down. His trembling mechadendrite gently sifted through the dust at his feet, retrieving a small crystalline fragment, one of the last echoes of the firstborn vessel. He lifted it with reverence, and for a moment, the shard glowed, projecting faint silhouettes of warriors who had stood at the dawn of humanity's forgotten ascendance. Turcidax bowed his head. "We have lived in the shadows of our ancestors," he murmured, voice crackling. "And now that their light has touched us again, what are we to become?" The shard dimmed, falling silent. With a final shudder, Turcidax's systems began to shut down. He clutched the fragment to his chest as darkness claimed him. Days later, as recovery fleets arrived, the moon remained eerily silent. Survey servitors reported no remaining power signatures, no warp anomalies, no trace of the vessel. It was as though the awakening had been a dream etched into metal and then erased. But the scars remained, vast rendings of the terrain, burnt pathways of light fused into the ground, and the crater that seemed to pulse faintly whenever one looked at it too long. Aboard the flagship, stratagem augurs faltered, detecting gravitational oscillations they could not chart. The fleet's chaplains gathered in the observation sanctum, gazing down at the moon world, reading the wound like theologians reading cosmic scripture. One whispered, "This place will be a pilgrimage site one day." Another replied, "Or a warning." Neither were wrong, neither were comforted. The moon remained quiet. In Macragge's temples, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Titus had become a conduit of ancient glory. Others insisted he had died to contain a weapon too terrible to name. In the Hall of Heroes, a fresh alcove was carved, deliberately left empty. No statue, no epitaph, only a bare niche lit by a flickering blue flame. Visitors lingered before it, unsure whether to bow or simply breathe in the cold solemnity of the space. Young initiates asked their mentors, "Why no likeness?" The answer varied with every veteran. Because no one understood him, because he transcended us, because what he became cannot be carved in stone. But in quiet corners, old warriors whispered a darker truth. Titus had become a question, not an answer. A question the Imperium was not ready to ask. The chaplain returned to Ultramar, carrying Titus's memory like a sacred burden. He walked through ruined cloisters, rebuilt training halls, and newly consecrated shrines, always feeling Titus's presence like a ghost just out of sight. Veramas often found himself pausing beside statues, expecting them to inhale, to speak, to question him as Titus once had. In prayer chambers, his lips moved silently as he wrestled with thoughts he could never voice aloud. What if faith was not a shield, but a veil? What if devotion was the faint remembrance of something humanity had once understood, but had long forgotten? When he knelt before the altar of Guilliman, he felt a tremor in his soul, a subtle pull, as though destiny itself had shifted its focus. "Brother," he whispered, "guide me." The flame on the altar flickered. Just once, enough to break him. Elsewhere, across distant battlefronts, strange sightings began. Warriors reported brief flashes of blue light on ruined worlds, or the sound of heavy footfalls where no warrior walked. Astartes felt momentary surges in their gene seed resonance, as if responding to an unseen command. Ships passing through dead systems occasionally detected a massive silhouette, too large, too ephemeral, too familiar, slipping through the void before vanishing into nothingness. At first, these were dismissed as warped mirages, but as reports multiplied, they took on a sacred fear. A Primaris lieutenant swore he saw a lone figure standing on the edge of a burning moon, azure armor gleaming with unearthly radiance. When asked who it was, he answered without hesitation, "Captain Titus." And then, under his breath, "Or something that used to be him." On Terra, the High Lords received fragmented data from the moon world, their fear veiled behind ceremonial grandeur. They debated, argued, raged. Was Titus a martyr? A threat? A prophecy? Some demanded his name be stricken from Imperial record. Others insisted he be sanctified. A single data slate lay at the center of the chamber, containing the final transmissions from the battlefield, half corrupted, half indescribable. The sigil burned into the moon's surface appeared on their hollow displays, a sun carved into a sun, folding in on itself. The room fell silent. Even the fabricators hesitated, their logic loops stuttering. One High Lord finally spoke, voice brittle. What if this was not an ending, but a summons? No one answered. No one dared. Star systems near the moon world began to experience faint tremors in the warp, like distant drumbeats or heartbeats or memories trying to remember themselves. Astropaths reported dreams of a colossal armored figure striding across the void, carrying a star in his chest. Some woke screaming. Others wept, unable to explain why. Fleet captains found themselves glancing toward the moon world, even when light years distant, feeling drawn by something they could neither name nor refuse. On warfronts where hope had long since died, soldiers felt a strange calm at the edge of death, a warmth, brief and inexplicable. "The captain walks," they whispered. "He walks where angels fear to tread." Their commanders silenced them, but they whispered anyway. Chaplain Verimas returned to the moon alone. No honor guard, no escort, no proclamation. Only a single warrior seeking an answer that had no language. He walked across the metallic plain, each step a memory, each breath a prayer fractured by doubt. When he reached the crater, he stopped. Its surface shimmered softly, reflecting constellations that no longer matched the galaxy above. Verimas knelt and placed his palm on the warm earth, closing his eyes. "Brother," he whispered, "if you still walk this universe, do you walk toward salvation or toward judgment?" The crater hummed low, resonant, ancient. A breeze stirred, and Verimas felt, for just an instant, the weight of a hand on his shoulder. Then the warmth vanished. In the end, the moon became silent once more. A scar left to cool beneath the indifferent vault of stars. The banners recovered from the battlefield were hung in a broken cathedral on Macragge, their edges charred, their colors faded. Candlelight flickered against cracked stained glass, casting fractured halos across the remnants of armor and shattered relics. Pilgrims knelt in the dust, whispering prayers they knew no longer fit the world as it had become. And a lone remembrancer, last descendant of a forgotten archivist line, sat beneath the worn banners, pen scratching softly across parchment. "The galaxy has not ended," he wrote, "but something within it has. In the ashes of our certainties, we are left with questions greater than our courage." He paused, gazing at the stars beyond the ruined archway. What does it mean to endure, and what becomes of those who endure too long? His words drifted like dust into the night. If you have walked this long road through faith, ruin, sacrifice, and the quiet echo of Captain Titus's legend, then stand witness with us. Like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments so this chronicle may endure a little longer in the shadows of the stars.